The judge in the George Zimmerman case just made a key ruling this morning. She says 2 experts who analyze voices screaming on 911 calls cannot be used. George Howell joins me live now. George, what is in this ruling?
Allison, let's start out by listening to that audio, because what you're listening to, the screams on that tape, is it Trayvon Martin? Is it George Zimmerman? Let's listen.
Does he look hurt to you?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending him.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your...
Here's the deal. The prosecution brought in its own expert witnesses, and through their methodologies, they were basically trying to show that it was not George Zimmerman screaming for help. But what we're finding now, because of this ruling, now the prosecution cannot suggest that it was not George Zimmerman. They're basically saying that it was not George Zimmerman in self-defense of his life.
This is a key piece, isn't it?
Very important. And, you know, to explain this a little better, I want to go to Mark Nejame on the phone. He's a CNN legal analyst. And, Mark, explain to us, if you could, why this is important for the defense as opposed to the prosecution.
Well, this is a devastating blow to the prosecution's case. It's already been a challenging case for them, and the cornerstone of their case was that the voice that was heard on the 911 tape was, in fact, Trayvon Martin, because it would have suggested that he was the one being victimized and that George Zimmerman was the aggressor. Well, all other witnesses have indicated that the voices are unintelligible and that there's no scientific standard which permits them in. And the state attempted to put in a couple of witnesses, a witness, who would indicate that he could determine singularly from everybody else in the world that it was, in fact, Trayvon Martin who was saying or screaming, "Help me, help me." Well, the defense put on a stream of witnesses which indicated that this was basically hocus pocus and it had no scientific validity, and the judge opined that they were correct. So this basically guts the state from being able to use any scientific evidence indicating that it was, in fact, Trayvon Martin's voice heard saying, "Help me, help me."
Mark,
With that, we come down to basic forensics and the state having to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, which will be extremely more challenging as a result of the exclusion of their witness.
Right. And Mark, let's get into the weeds a bit on this with Dr. Alan Reich and Tom Owen. These are the people that the prosecution brought into the case. Tom Owen, you remember, looped segments of that audio to make his determination that it was very likely not George Zimmerman. And then Dr. Alan Reich, who had his own methodology, who amplified that audio and determined that it was a higher pitch, someone with a younger voice, someone whose voice was still developing. What does it mean now, though, as far as looking at their methodologies? Is that what it came down to make sure that, you know, they can't be heard in this case?
Yes, the standard which the judge, in a very well-written, well-reasoned order, she was very anxious to get off the bench yesterday, and now I think we know why. She already prepared and entered a written 12-page, very complex order, to the extent that it really took apart everybody's testimony over the 4 days of hearings and included the facts and then interweaved them and came up with her opinion. Well, basically, what she's saying, I mean, a lot of things, but she put the most credence on Dr. French, a world-renowned expert in the area, who basically considers any other opinion to be embarrassing. And what the state was trying to get in is that their witness, who ended up having a financial vested interest in the method that he used, because he gets a commission on it, but basically needs 16 seconds of tape. And all they had was 7 seconds. So he thought, well, I'll just loop it. So he looped it twice to get a larger segment, and everybody's basically concurred that that was somewhat preposterous. It'd be like if you needed 16 seconds and you had a 1 second voice, could you do that 16 times to get to your 16 seconds? So he looped it so that it became 14 seconds, and which was closer to the 16 seconds. And there's just no other scientists in the community which said that that was an appropriate way to do it, and it didn't satisfy any scientifically acceptable standards. And accordingly, I think the judge, which is what we were saying previously, made the correct legal ruling. It's simply not scientifically acceptable.